Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today we're doing something a little bit different on the channel. We're going to be talking all about New World Order conspiracies, and the sort of analysis tool that we're going to be using here is the book by Michael Barkin, A Culture of Conspiracy. I did one sort of upload on this channel recently discussing Dr. Barkin's book because I was kind of just jumping all over the place and was just mentioning some kind of thought processes associated with how conspiracy theories function, which hence the title A Culture of Conspiracy. That's one of the reasons why he wrote the book. But today I thought we would focus on his chapters on New World Order conspiracies. And, like the New World Order conspiracy can be referred to a variety of things. It is definitely something like a super conspiracy where you think many different things are intertwined because you have the New World Order plotting and planning all sorts of events around the world. Alex Jones spent many years making a living discussing what was going on with the New World Order. And this ties into many other things of like our existing institutions, such as the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank. All of these things can be pulled into the New World Order. The other thing we need to say about this is that the New World Order can take on many names. In Alex Jones's film The Obama Deception, they called it the Anglo-American Alliance, the Washington-New York-London Connection, and we can also refer to it as something like from the Lynn Marcus movement, the British system of political economy based on speculation. That variant of it, the British system, that actually recognizes that this isn't only the people, this is the actual economic system that is in place. Now let's look at some of the things that we have going on here. On page 39 in Dr. Barkin's book, we can read a little. New World Order theories claim that both past and present events must be understood as the outcome of efforts by an immensely powerful but secret group to seize control of the world. Okay, now, I gotta be honest with you guys, I'm a little bit of a skeptic with all conspiracy theories. I'm just a skeptical person in general. And when we have something like this, that past and present events are the result of the New World Order, as well as things like, this just happened by accident, or even if there are people plotting and scheming, even if there is a group of elites that are sitting around a table planning events, how do we know that it's the same elites all the time? Well, the people, whether it's Alex Jones or, we mentioned Lynn Marcus, but also someone, such as James Fetzer, who's involved with the 9/11 Truth Movement, Webster Tarpley, any of these people, how do they know that it's actually just one group of global elites or just one system run by the global elites? It's like there are two things that can happen with this. The first is that either these people are geniuses, either they're absolutely brilliant and everything that they're saying is 100% true, or perhaps, they won't be able to prove or disprove anything. If their theory is completely fictitious, there's going to be no evidence of it. They won't be able to prove or disprove anything. So then no one will ever be able to challenge them on something that they don't have any sort of physical evidence of. It's like they can, if you're talking about something that isn't actually there, no one can challenge you on it. That's kind of the nutshell version of what I was trying to share and convey. But let's keep reading. Most commonly, these theories now include some or all of the following elements. Number one, the systematic subversion of Republican institutions by a federal government utilizing emergency powers. Number two, the gradual subordination of the United States to a world government operating through the United Nations. Number three, the creation of sinister new military and paramilitary forces, including mobilization of urban youth, gangs, the permanent stationing of foreign troops on U.S. soil, the widespread use of black helicopters to transport the tyrannies of operatives. Number four, the confiscation of privately owned guns and the incarceration of so-called patriots in concentration camps run by FEMA. Once again, FEMA camps are another hot button issue for conspiracy theorists. Everything that Dr. Barkin was writing about here is kind of like what we would refer to as globalism. Alex Jones mentions the concept of the globalists a lot. The globalists were coming for you. Well, globalism, was put forward by some other people as connecting the United States to a series of international agreements. Furthermore, though, Alex Jones has not, demonstrated really to, I guess, the general public's satisfaction that globalism is immediately interconnected with this New World Order in the sense that it's designed on human control. I mean, yes, they want things like order and also peace and security, but how does that go from the United Nations to this destructive New World Order force? And I understand that there are a lot of people out there who aren't going to want to hear this stuff. There are people out there who aren't going to want to hear this, but a lot of people are just very set in their ways when it comes to something such as the New World Order, and it almost takes on more of a belief system rather than an argumentative standpoint. Kevin Shipp, the former CIA officer who went public and says things very similar to the old Webster Tarpley models, talks about a lot of things that are quite similar to the New World Order theories espoused by, people like Alex Jones. But one of the big things about this is it's just like, where is the proof? I mean, I get that you're kind of giving this explanation, but as the historian Patricia Crone once said, never substitute torturous reasoning for hard evidence. Okay, on page 40 we have the concepts of the New World Order were, of course, far removed from what President George H.W. Bush had in mind when he popularized the phrase New World Order at the time of the Gulf War in 1991. He drew on quite a different tradition on which he went back many decades and referred to a new and more stable international system associated with effective mechanisms for collective security. See, this is something interesting here. I mean, when you hear something like New World Order, it sounds very far out, it sounds very crazy, it sounds very destructive, it sounds, it sounds like it's really something that you should be afraid of. It sounds like almost sort of the conspiracy theorist boogeyman. If something terrible happens, oh, the New World Order did it. But how do we prove that the New World Order actually exists as opposed to being just a more stable international system associated with effective mechanisms for collective security? How do we get to that level of proof? And once again, we have to look out for some of the conspiracy theorist mechanisms that are in play. Conspiracy theorists would often take two isolated facts and then create a fictitious connection to unify them. Some of the examples of this would be, say, for example, you have, a terrorist attack in this one place. You also have, someone from a particular organization making a phone call about that building that was hit by a terrorist attack. Okay, now the conspiracy theorist is going to create a fictitious connection and say that that person who was on the phone was making a call deliberately to order the terrorist attack. That was the trigger. That was the signal. That was, the linchpin. But once again, you don't necessarily know that those two events are completely connected in the way that the conspiracy theorist is describing. And let's keep looking here. The idea of the New World Order as a sinister development draws on two distinct streams of ideas that have evolved separately but eventually converged. One source is millenarian Christianity embedded in fundamentalist Protestantism. Okay, well, the writer's somewhat losing me here. I don't really see how any of this is connected. Let's see if he explains about how Protestantism is connected to the New World Order. Its speculations about the end times, when history reached its climax and termination, led to scenarios in which a diabolical figure, the Antichrist, would fasten his grip upon the world. Now, alright, I think that that's kind of a bizarre way of introducing the subject for Dr. Michael Barkin in this book that we're reading from, A Culture of Conspiracy. And his subtitle is Apocalyptic Visions in Contemporary America. I don't really know why he's introducing the subject in that manner, but I definitely hear people equating the New World Order with pure evil. The Lyndon LaRouche movement was very big when they were talking about how the global elites are pure evil. Henry Kissinger works for the forces of evil. They're very big on that, and that's kind of like labeling them as the sort of Antichrist, labeling them as the sort of, destructive force in the world that is just destructive for the sake of being destructive. All right, I can see that people are equating the New World Order with evil, but I think that's almost a poor taste sentence that was composed by Dr. Michael Barkin in this book. The term Antichrist itself appears only a few times in the New Testament, relegated to the first and second epistles of John. It is invoked almost in passing, but always in the sense that the person or persons referred to are deceivers and false prophets who will appear as adversaries in the last days. All right, so he's explained a little bit more here. What he's actually trying to say is that this is a much older idea. This is something that comes, I guess sort of a repetition throughout human history and human thought, and also an influence on human thought that it's just there is somebody who is acting like they are supposed to be helping us. The United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, those things that we talked about, but in reality, they're actually here to destroy us. One of the big things is the United Nations definitely wants control and security in the world. The United States government wants control and security in the world. Even if that limits what certain people can do, I mean, that's what a law is. It limits what people can do, and it's sort of an understanding that we cannot do these certain things. But I would say that, it's like, I would just sort of say that's not necessarily on the same thing as that there are global elites masterminding all the tragedies of the world, or that there is even a single group of global elites, perhaps the Bilderberg Group, perhaps Bohemian Grove, that are sitting around and masterminding all the destructive events in the world that we know. But let's look here at some other things. The interwar period provided fertile ground for Antichrist speculation, not only because the League, referring to the League of Nations, but also because the emergence of European dictators, Hitler and Mussolini, lent themselves to the scenarios for millenarians. For once Mussolini seemed to trump his German ally because, at least insofar as the Antichrist was concerned, his identification appeared to be firmer. He reached an agreement with the Pope, he ruled from Rome, and he made no secret of his desire to revive the Roman Empire. Among the most enthusiastic exponents of this war was the American Nazi sympathizer and anti-Semite Gerald Winrod. Can't say I'm very familiar with him. I think, though, this book is starting to touch on one of the things that I find absolutely fascinating, and that's just kind of what was going on with Hitler and Mussolini prior to World War II. A lot of people really think that it was the Hitler of 1929 that was something that really came when Hitler kind of came into the figure that we know of him as, the figure that we know him as today, and it was the Mussolini of 1920 when Mussolini became what we know him to be as today. And that Dr. Barkin is kind of in line with that when he's writing this in his book, because that would mean that Mussolini came into power much earlier. But, it's like, we talked a little bit about Hitler in the last conspiracy theory upload, and Hitler was someone who believed in an anti-Jewish conspiracy, and Dr. Daniel Pipes wrote about him extensively, and he sort of said that Hitler believed in this sort of anti-Jewish conspiracy that Jews were plotting and scheming to gain more power on the European mainland, so Hitler created the counter-conspiracy, and it was the counter-conspiracy that actually became true. That would have been a conspiracy theory that was true. They sort of came up with this plan to take control of Germany and actually to take over the entire world, if we're going to view it that way. And I believe there was something like a final solution. There was something like the 1,000-year plan, and well, the 4-year plan, and then the 1,000-year plan. But I would really say that anti-Semitic conspiracy theories are something that are also fascinating. They're terrible, absolutely terribly wrong. But once again, we mentioned that stuff in the previous upload, but just to recap the hypothesis put forward by Daniel Pipes, where it's like the reasons why he believes that anti-Jewish conspiracy theories form is because for centuries in Europe, the Jews were present among other European populations, but they lived in their own neighborhoods. Many of them all worked in banking, they intermarried, and they had their own language, Yiddish, so they were just kind of cut off from the rest of society, and people did not understand what they were about. They just didn't know what the Jews were doing. They were just this social group that was kind of cut off, that had their own traditions, so people didn't understand them. That, I think, is one of the absolute kind of most amazing things to study. But it's through things like the New World Order that we also get to the next section here in Dr. Michael Barkin's book, A Culture of Conspiracy, when we look at the Illuminati. And there's actually, an even modern Illuminati movement that he talks about. The post 1965 Illuminati literature became so vast that only a sampling can be discussed here, drawn from both secular and religious sources. And we're going to get some other things that you can check out called Call It Conspiracy by Larry Abram, which was first published in 1971, claims to expose a conspiracy of insiders bent on world domination. See, now this is a very interesting thing here. How do we get to this group of insiders that are all set on world domination? Yeah, there are people like that are genuinely true. Adolf Hitler was a great example of that. And as well as, things like the Soviet Union. I mean, that was also sort of a thing that was going on there. Stalin was a counter conspiracy theorist that, and like Stalin was a conspiracy theorist, so he formed his own counter conspiracy. And that was something that was true. After the insiders have established the United Socialist States of America, in fact, it is not just in name, the next step is the great merger of all nations of the world into a dictatorial government. Once again, this quote is from Larry Abraham's Call It Conspiracy, 1971. Well, this is a very clear example of the New World Order theories, the one world government. It's like one of the other things about the Illuminati is we should recognize that most sources reveal that the Illuminati was a real thing. There's just people argue that they disbanded, and other people argue that they just changed shape. Although his roster of insiders is drawn from the usual reservoir, such as the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, their roots are claimed to be late in the 18th century. Well, now we got to talk about the Council on Foreign Relations for a second. This is something that I believe is very, very interesting because the Council on Foreign Relations is often said to be something that was created by the Rockefellers to kind of exert their influence onto world affairs. And one of the big things that the Rockefellers did was they, they hired Henry Kissinger and they hired Zbigniew Brzezinski. But Henry Kissinger is someone who, after he left the Secretary of State post under Nixon and Ford, then he went on to found Kissinger and Associates. And then, one of his, vice presidents began to take over the leadership of the Council on Foreign Relations. So you see that there is this kind of interconnected network that is affected by the global elites, and that isn't a conspiracy theory. I would say that there is a certain degree in planning. Nelson Rockefeller was very heavy president of the United States. He was called the most influential vice president who never became president himself. So it's like we really have to recognize the conspiracy theorists are not based on nothing. It's just what we really have to recognize is what is the level of Nelson Rockefeller's role in society? What is Henry Kissinger's role in society? And what we really want to know is oligarchy is a real thing. And I might sound like a conspiracy, and the prince are connected by bloodline, and then the prince will become king, as well as the nobles and the royals. All of these people are part of the aristocracy. Well, the oligarchy is a little different because people can be absorbed into the oligarchy, and it doesn't have anything to do with bloodline. It is just a society that is being controlled by a particular group of individuals, a society that has been controlled by a very select group of people, and only this group gets the power. Yeah, occasionally you can bring in new people into the group. Henry Kissinger would be a perfect example of that. Although there actually is a larger conspiracy theory associated with him that Henry Kissinger was, the son of a KGB liaison, that Henry Kissinger's father, who was the superintendent of schools in the town of Fürth, Germany, was, the liaison for that town and the KGB, and he was the member of, what was the name of that political party? But I forget. But he was the sort of liaison and direct operative for the KGB. So then his son was, of course, Henry Kissinger, who would go on to become the Secretary of State of the United States. So it's like we really do. I think that the biggest thing to come away from all of this is we want to recognize that there is a group of people who are sort of like modern day aristocrats. You can call it an oligarchy if you want, but in reality, a lot of these oligarchs were founded upon the old bloodlines of the aristocracy. And it's like there were these kind of aristocrats, nobles, royals, and now that we don't really recognize the aristocracy too much in North America, their influence has shifted to that of oligarchs, and we definitely have financial oligarchs. Everyone is in agreement with that. That's why people with the tax Wall Street thing and the Occupy Wall Street, Occupy movements in general, they were opposed to the 1%. We are the 99%. Why are they shouting that? Because the 1% are the financial oligarchs. Bernie Sanders has also addressed this issue as well. And now oligarchs are not only about finance, it's also about the old bloodlines of the aristocracy and whoever they find useful enough to pull into the movement. But is there actually an interconnected nature of a new world order? Well, these connections definitely exist. There definitely are existing structures. There definitely are existing power structures. There definitely are global elites that share ideas. Richard Nixon talked very openly about Bohemian Grove. He thought it was a total waste of time and it was something really boring. But Ronald Reagan was an attendee of Bohemian Grove and went on to become president. Global elites are all connected. That much is true. But what I don't believe that people have proven, especially not Alex Jones or Kevin Shipp, is that the global elites are very calculating, that they are masterminding all the world events. No, we definitely have things like the Skull and Bones where people are just trying to pull other people up into positions of power and prosperity. But how do we recognize that they are calculating all the world events? I guess the sort of moral of the story here with this particular upload is that conspiracy theories are not always based on nothingness. I'm a skeptic. But if you get too skeptical, then you start to recognize that, you're just saying there's nothing there for everything. That can't be your answer. Sometimes there are things that are there, and that's fine to admit. But it doesn't mean that it's just a grossly calculated event. It just means that people in positions of power share their connections with other people in positions of power. Well, that's all for me now. Until next time, take care.